welcome to another video for One Loose Sprocket. And today we're going to talk about this burning question. What is the difference between a solvent and a lubricant? So I have several products here, and what I want to do is kind of describe a general understanding of what exactly the difference is between the two, and then I'll start to describe how one solvent may be better than another depending on the situation in which we are trying to apply, and the whatever the conditions as well. So there's a couple factors. Anyway, so a solvent is pretty much anything from about here across to here, and I'll describe some of these. But what is a solvent? A solvent is something that is used to either prepare, clean, prep, or somehow remove dirt, junk, residue, whatever the thing may be. So that is really the purpose of a solvent. Okay, so what is considered a solvent? Well, as you can see, I have several here, and at least I'll speak from a bike perspective, that what we have here, for example, we have a paint thinner, we have a chain and sprocket degreaser, we have alcohol, we have vinegar, we have the PB blaster, which is very similar to our famous WD-40, and we have acetone. And we have our mineral spirits in the back here, mineral spirits. Okay, so these are solvents, and why are they considered a solvent? Because when you apply these to some surface, it's not going to stay there. Okay, it's a very simple way to describe it. Okay, because when you put it there, it does a certain job, and what that job is to remove something else. That's what a solvent does. It dissolves something, whether either dissolves something like a chemical. It could dissolve, it could have something else to be removing, maybe like obviously like old grease or something that is maybe contaminated, or it's to penetrate, like for example a rusty bolt. That's also a very, very good one. You want to get in there and be able to break something loose. Then of course you want to use some sort of like obviously WD-40, which is very good for that. And some of these other ones are used for kind of the same purpose. The situation would be, for example, if I'm talking about a chain, then I have this chain and sprocket degreaser, and I really like this a lot. And the reason why I like this a lot is because well, first of all, let me describe it. It's made by DuPont, and DuPont makes it, and it's chain sprocket degreaser, fast acting, low odor, safe for sale, sealed chains, O-ring safe, no water rinsing required. The reason why is because when you spray it on, it comes out as a foam, okay? And it immediately attacks like wax and grease and things like that. It'll attack it. And what it does is that because it foams up, then it kind of stays on there for a little while, and then over time as the bubbles start to pop and things like that, obviously because the foam then starts to degrade, then it drips off, and as it's dripping off, it's actually pulling off all that excess grease and stuff like that that's on the chain. So it's really nice. So obviously you want to have something underneath it probably to catch it, but and you can't clean it with like a rag or something like that afterwards, or while it's after like maybe 10, 15, 20 seconds, and maybe you clean it up. But I'd say just let it do its job, okay? Because the only thing it's gonna do is improve the removal of all that grease. So this is a really good one for me. For me, I like it a lot. Okay, so this is for removing grease. That's really what it's for. All right, but we have other reasons too. So, for example, we have the paint thinner. The paint thinner I don't use too much on a bike, obviously, because I don't do a whole lot of painting. But obviously, the paint thinner is a really good one for removing your excess paint, or for removing a clear coat or something like that. That's really what this is for. So, not a huge fan of using this on a bike necessarily. Okay. So what else do we have? We have acetone. Now, acetone is a really, really good solvent, but not necessarily for removing rust. What this does is actually a good one for preparing a surface. So for example, I typically will use the acetone when I am, when I'm patching a tube or something like that, then I'll scuff it up with my sandpaper, which is typically what you do. But to remove the residue that's left there, then I'll use the acetone and clean it off, make sure that it's nice and clean. And when I put the patch on, then it sticks really, really good. I mean, it is just fantastic. So that's kind of the reason why I use the acetone for something like that. Or if, for example, there's something stuck on a bike frame and I want to really attack it kind of a little more aggressively than I would, for example, with my typical go-to, which is the mineral spirits. Mineral spirits are really good for cleaning, but it doesn't really degrade the clear coat or anything like that on a bike. But this will, the acetone does, but it's not an aggressive. It's not an aggressive like the degreaser, like the paint thinner, where the paint thinner it'll just strip it down like nobody's business, right? It just removes everything. The acetone and will somewhat take off. So for example, there's something that's kind of really really stuck on there, and I say, okay, well, let me just take off this, or because I may be prepping something for receiving a new coat of clear coat, then of course I'll use the acetone. And the good thing is it dries almost immediately. And that is something of a danger, because obviously I work in my enclosed environment here in my garage for the most part. So fumes from this, and to an extent fumes from this can become overpowering. Obviously we deal in a world that has a lot of carcinogens, and these carcinogens are present almost everywhere. And breathing in these vapors is not a good thing, because obviously the VOCs in a lot of these compounds is actually a very bad thing for the body. And obviously I'm talking to you from a perspective of a chemical engineer. So I know pretty much what these are and the dangers that are involved. So at times I actually do have a respirator that I can wear. I have a respirator that will help protect myself from some of the fumes if that becomes too overpowering. Or I just simply open the garage door and let the breeze carry everything out. So it kind of depends on what the situation is. But yeah, the big one obviously the paint thinner, because the paint thinner does have methylene chloride. Methylene chloride is a very nasty, dangerous compound, because when it comes in contact with the skin or comes in contact with nasal passages or something like that, it will break down into hydrochloric acid. And I believe the other piece is methane. So I mean, between methane and hydrochloric acid, those are both very bad. That's very bad for our bodies. So we don't want that. And so obviously the solvents involved here are at times dangerous. That's why I like to use the mineral spirits, because it's usually low odor, as well as it has a higher boiling point, or so that it doesn't evaporate really fast. But it will, over 10-15 minutes, it'll be gone from whatever surface I'm cleaning. And I use the mineral spirits a lot as a soaking mechanism. Obviously I have a lot of my little disposable containers that I've made, and what I'll do is I'll just toss some of that in there, and you can see where it is removing the dirt and the grease and stuff like that. So this is really a good one that I just swirl it around and just attack it with maybe a wire brush or a nylon brush, and just go ahead and attack it, and it cleans it off pretty good. So so this is my go-to, and of course my cleanser for the most part is this, which is a combination of the mineral spirits with a little bit of gas in there, just to kind of toss in there, because that's actually basically just a little bit more aggressive, because the gas is also pretty good. But of course not really good for your hands. That's why I always wear gloves. I have gloves when I'm working with my solvents and stuff like that. Okay, so now WD-40. Everybody knows WD-40, right? So the WD stands for water displacement. 40 is the number it took for them to get to of their formulas before they perfected that formula and their product. And of course, it's been well known ever since I think it's back in the 60s when they're working on the space program. They said we needed something to help to help as the water displacement, obviously, to protect it from oxidation, things like that. That's what rust is. But this is what they came up with, and of course we use it to this day. So I have my gallon, I have my spray bottle. So this is obviously very well known. BB Blaster is very similar to that. Has a little bit more of a color to it as well, but it evaporates a little bit faster too. It's not quite so long lasting as this, okay? All right, so I think I've talked about all these solvents. Oh, one more is vinegar. So vinegar actually is a really good solvent, if you will. It's almost a reagent, because it actually reacts with the rust on things. But it takes like 2 to 3 days before it'll actually remove rust completely. And it's not it doesn't take it down to bare metal so you have a clean surface. It takes some work. Now there are some other things that are rust removers. There's different products out there. I'm not going to really talk too much about them, because again I use a lot of my other stuff. It's just simply old-fashioned elbow grease, and I just scrape it off. I have my my wire brushes and things like that, and I use that to polish or to clean stuff up. So for the most part, I don't necessarily need to have a rust remover. I do use it at times, and I'm probably going to start using it maybe a little more frequently, just to kind of see how it works over time. and see if it really does, because I've seen lots of YouTube videos, obviously, it's just to confirm that it actually does what it should do. Okay, so solvents, that's it. All right, so let me just move these out of the way a little bit, give myself a little room to work with here. And we are going to talk about lubricants, okay? So solvent means it's used to clean, prep, prepare, loosen, whatever the situation may be, but it's not going to stay around. It's going to evaporate at some point. It's going to come off of whatever it is. Now, we have our lubricants. Okay, so we have just regular motor oil here. We've got grease here. We've got other greases back here. We've got other lubricants and stuff like that. Now, what is a lubricant? So a lubricant is something that's going to stay on whatever substrate that you have. So whatever surface you're trying to protect, you're either going to put something of this on there so it coats it so that water and air cannot touch it, because that's when you start the rusting process. It's the oxidation of the metal as it makes contact with oxygen, either in the air or in the water, and obviously you start to form ferrous oxides and stuff like that, which is basically what rust is. Aluminum, the same thing. Aluminum rusts very easily, and usually we don't have bare aluminum around, because we usually will coat it with something to protect it from the rusting or the corrosion process, because rusting is really strictly for iron for the most part, steel. So, but regardless, so I have all these guys over here. Okay, so let me go to my favorite, and then I'll work to some of the other ones. Okay, so my favorite is we have this Easy Lube here, and we have this Chain Saver here, and we have this one here, which are basically all the same, kind of fall into the same category. The one I like the most is this Chain Saver, because this is the one that I use a lot, because it's almost empty. But you hear it's a rattle can, so to speak, because what happens is that this one should have one in here too. No, okay. Regardless, what these are wax-based lubricants. What is a wax-based lubricant, you ask? Oh, I'm glad you asked. So, a wax-based lubricant means that it's a suspended wax, and this one, I don't know if this one has Teflon in it, but I know these two do, because DuPont makes Teflon, so they have the Teflon in here with the wax, and that's used to obviously provide it allows the movement of metal to metal, or metal to some other surface, so that it is as smooth as possible as well. So the lubricant really is twofold: to protect the surface from the elements, okay, so that it does not rust. That's one. The second one is to reduce friction. And reducing friction is obviously a big deal, because we don't want to have to spend a lot of time cranking on a bike trying to get up a hill when our bike is working against us. It's kind of similar to riding a bike with the brakes on, okay? Just, that how counterintuitive is that? It's completely against what we're trying to do. It's very counterproductive. So, but with these guys, what it does is, the reason why they're called dry lubes is because what they do is when you put that on the chain, because the chain I really use it for chains for the most part. I put it on the chain, and what happens is then it will coat the chain links themselves, and what it will do is obviously it protects it from the environment, but it protects it from dust more than water, so to speak. So it does, obviously, if you get wax wet, obviously, it doesn't, it's hydrophobic, so it doesn't allow water to penetrate. But at the same time, it doesn't attract dirt, and that's the key. So you have a dry lubricant, and then over here, where is my other one? This Wet Ride is actually a wet lubricant. So I'll describe that in just a second. So we have the dry lubricants, and what I do is I'll spray them on, and obviously, as you can see, it is in an aqueous form. I use a lot of the my terms. So it is in aqueous form for the most part, so it is liquid. But what happens is that the stuff will settle in the bottom, so you have to shake it up, because that wax is then at the bottom, because it's not, obviously it's not designed to mix in, it's not a solvent, so it's a lubrication, so it's going to stay at the bottom. So you mix it up with this, whatever the solvent is that's inside here, and you put it on. Now this is just drip on, okay? This is a spray can. That's why it has the rattle can. There's a rattle in there, and so when you spray it on, it has the liquid will also cause it to coat your surface well, and then over time it will evaporate off, leaving behind the wax and the lubrication. So that's what it does. So both of these are pretty much the same. This one's the same as well. It's just a different application. These are both for spray. This is the drip on. So that's what a dry lubricant does. I live in Texas. I live where it's pretty dry. It doesn't rain a whole lot. At times it does, but it's not enough for me to really be too concerned about it. Whereas if I were to live in some place where it's very wet, obviously in the Northwest or along the coast or along the coast of a beach or something like that where you have a lot of salt water, oh, that is the worst, because that will attack, not only do you have it wet, but you have salt involved too, and the sodium chloride for the salt will actually only exacerbate the problem. It actually penetrates you faster. That's why salt water is so dangerous to surfaces, especially for rusting, things like that. It just attacks it like crazy. So that's kind of the reason why we need to be able to be careful about how we put this. That we have to determine what is the application. Where am I going to be riding? Where my bike? Am I going to be keeping my bike outside? Am I going to keep my bike in a garage? Am I going to keep my bike wherever? I have to determine that, and then based on what it is I want to do, okay, how long life do I want to have for my lubrication? Because these waxes will degrade somewhat quicker maybe than something else, like a grease, but at the same time, it's, again, once you hear the squeak, that tells you it's time to put something back on there. That's kind of the nice thing when you hear the squeaking, huh? So that's the dry. Now this wet ride is obviously the opposite of this easy lube here, and both of these can be found. Oh, I should tell you, both of these can be found in Walmart. At least I've seen them in Walmart. I bought this in Walmart. This was actually in the RV section of Walmart, as well as this one. These two are right next to each other. So basically I have both of these right next to each other, and I was like, fantastic. I'll take the degreaser, I'll take the wax. Perfect, I've got both of what I need, the best of both worlds, right? So these are, like I say, found in the RV section, in the automotive section, or it's around there. Hard to find at times, and I'm not going to say every Walmart has them. I'm just saying that I've seen them there, and that's where I buy mine. So that's where this is found. This 1PP blaster, for the most part, is found in Home Depot. That's where I usually find them. So in the PP blaster here, I got this one. So I got a couple of those PP blasters there, but we'll talk about those in a little bit. So now that I talked about my dry, now to talk about my wet. So this wet ride is for rainy conditions or wet conditions where I'm going to have maybe mud, or I'm going to have something that is going to have a lot of water attacking it, because the water does really affect the wax a little more than it should. Whereas this is going to help protect it, because it is wet. It kind of has a better job of repelling the water and junk and stuff like that. So I'm not, because of course I don't live in a wet condition. I don't have a whole lot of experience using this in that application. But what I do is I will use this in, for example, when I'm doing a freewheel rebuild. So I'm building the actual freewheel, the sprocket itself. I will put this inside for the pawls to help keep those pawls moving nice and smooth, because it is a closed system. And I would either use the motor oil, which of course that's a good thing to use in a closed system because it doesn't run off. That's why we use that's why we use oil in our cars, because we want it to be able to flow and circulate, because that's the way it keeps everything lubricated. Kind of the same with this thing. I use this as a replacement for this because it does have some extra additives in here. It's synthetic. There's some wet film, synthetic technology, water repelling, long lubrication intervals. So I was saying, so it stays on for quite some time. And then it said the elasticity delivers maximum for rust protection. So obviously it's the best choice for riding in wet conditions. So that's what this says. So, so what I say, I put that in there. So the pawls, because if you put grease on the pawls, then usually it gums them up after a while, and pretty soon you have a freewheel that's a freewheel this way and this way. So both directions. But we don't want that. So we want the pawls to be able to be lubricated, but at the same time be able to move freely with no inhibition with respect to the actual lubricate, that whatever lubricant we put in there. So that's what this is for. So I typically would use this more for other applications than to really put it on my chain. Okay, so that's a wet ride. That's the a wet application. All right, so now let's talk about something else. And this is we're going to talk about greases and other lubricants. So here we have this as water resistant silicone lubricant. You see it's made by WD-40. Obviously they branched out into several other things than just simply making the WD-40 we always know. So here's this as specialist. It says protective white lithium grease. So this is a grease, because it's a spray, then I usually use this and when I'm going to go in, for example, if for example I don't want to take apart a freewheel, but I hear there's something it's catching a little bit, I'll spray this in there and just kind of work it in, because it's somewhat aqueous at the beginning, but then that again, it's the same concept as this one, where it's an aqueous form. When we spray it on, then the solvent will evaporate off and leaves the grease behind. So that's good. And this is kind of the same concept here. This grease, this Lucas grease, this is red and tacky, so it's a little bit thicker than the lithium grease. So it has a little bit more, it's a little more robust. So, but this silicone is something I have not used this too much, and I do have this other PV blaster as well. So obviously the two brands, both of these are silicone based, not wax based. So these are wax based, these are silicone based. I'll have to try these someday to kind of get a feel for what they do and how good they are at repelling water, dirt, and things like that. I'll probably use them on my old bike just to kind of see how big things go and how long they last as well, how long they'll stay there without being removed from the time, whatever. So that's that. Okay. So I do have a graphite dry lube as well, and I rarely use this one. I just got this. I said, we'll see. But it's mostly because this is also in aqueous form. So what it does is it stays completely dry, so it kind of fits in this category more with these guys, but it's graphite based instead of wax based. So it's not wax, it's not silicone, it's graphite. So obviously a lot of people use it for putting it in their locks for their keys so that it doesn't catch and stuff like that. That's a big one. It's showing some bearings here. I don't necessarily recommend using these on bearings necessarily, because I know that the bearings are I have other means, okay? So we'll talk about it in just a second. So graphite, I have to give this a shot, maybe too. I don't have a whole lot of knowledge about that one. Okay, so let's talk about lubrication. Now the actual grease, that's what most people understand as a lubricant. So I talked a little bit about my red and tacky. I like to use this a lot because it has a spray nozzle, so I can go ahead and just get in certain areas. Of course, we have the lithium grease, which is nice to actually also penetrate as well into cracks and crevices. But when I'm doing when I'm repacking bearings and things like that, then I like to use the Staplex Extreme Pressure Premium Red Grease, which is obviously it's set up in a tube, so you can go ahead and do an injection, stuff like that. I just take this out, and what I'll do is I'll just put it into this syringe here, and then I have the ability to be very precise in my application. And I typically use this when I want to put on a very fine bead of lubrication, because it's going to go inside a race. Bearing race, and then I'm gonna have some loose bearings, and that's just where I want to make sure it's only in that location. And my biggest thing is when I'm doing my freewheel rebuilds, that I don't want it to cross over into the pawls or into other locations where I don't want it necessarily to have the grease there, and I want it to have in a specific location where the bearings are. So that's typically where this is. Now my go-to for grease though is actually this this Valvoline multi-vehicle grease. I have this one, and you can see I have this SDP one up here as well. This is for when this one runs out. So these are they're low to mid end, lower end to kind of mid quality greases. They're run of the mill. There's nothing fantastic about these. They do the job, really. That's what it is. The premium stuff is when I'm using it in some location where it's either high velocity or where I don't want it to break down too quickly, and then I'll use it like that. And then, like I said, it's usually I'm using my freewheels because the freewheels are rotating a lot. There's a lot of movement and rotation. The bearings on the wheels, etc. That'd be another location where I want to use those at times. So that's really where I'm trying to be a little more careful. I don't want to have something that does not break down. The high pressure, obviously, is a good point too. Not a huge deal for a bike. There's not enough pressure in any part of the bike that would require that. But at the same time, it's a better quality. That's all. So that's really what I'm looking for when I use a grease, and actually having a grease being used, because it's an enclosed area, so it's not exposed to the elements, so it won't be attacked, and it won't leak out very quickly. You don't want it to have something that it just falls out. So oil is really a bad idea to use in an open system. So you want to have a grease that'll kind of stay inside the location between your race and your cup, and really just lubricate your bearings. That's really what you want. I will use this anti-seize. I'll use this guy on my vise here to allow an easy rotation of the vise itself and keep it lubricated, obviously, because I don't want this thing to rust or anything like that. So I will use that in this thing. So threaded applications are really where I want to use this, and I will use it on, for example, I have my bike stand as well, so I lubricate that thing as well, so it makes it easy to move and all that stuff. So really open the situation. Now this may actually be used on a chain? It may. But the question is now, is it going to do a good job? And that I cannot say, okay? Because of the fact that it does have copper in, I mean, basically you've already introduced something. I would say in low movement, where it doesn't require a lot of, there's not a whole lot of, you know, rotation going on, like for example bearings. I would not use this in bearings. I don't think that's really a good idea. So, because what it does, the copper actually, instead of acting as a lubricant, it acts as an abrasive. So we don't want to necessarily cause more damage than what should. That's why most of the greases are pure. They don't include something like this where this has the copper. But in low stress and low rotation application or low friction, then that's where it becomes really good, because then it's not going to be constantly moving and constantly rubbing against each other and the surfaces, you know, these two surfaces. So that's really a good application. So really good though, really good. Like I say, for NTCs, this is actually really, really good. Okay, last one. Now this is a new piece of something that I got. It's called Presto Mag, and I have not even used this thing just yet. But this is a bluing compound that's used for, well, in certain applications they've used it for protecting guns and rifles from, they use the bluing compound in that to protect it from rust. That's one way. I'm thinking about starting to use this on some of my pieces to see how it works. Now, I don't know, like I say, the application for this is going to be somewhat interesting, because this is a chemical reaction. What this does it actually will react with the metal. And these are exposed metals. So for example, screw heads and what else? You know, for spokes maybe, you know, that's something like that, something where the metal, you can't really lubricate it because it's not rubbing against something, and you're not going to put grease up and down your spokes, obviously. That's kind of dumb. So what this does is actually it reacts with the metal and it applies. So it's something similar to galvanization. So when you galvanize something, you apply a chemical to the metal, it reacts, but then it forms a coating around the metal. So the metal now is protected by this chemical compound now that is unreactive with water, because it's now protected. It's already applied, and they do that a lot with aluminum. So they'll coat the aluminum, then they'll put on a corrosive agent that will cause it to react, and once it reacts, then that protects it from the elements. So that's the one thing. So this is something actually new for me. I'm still learning how to work with this. Stay tuned, as let's say, for more about this a little later on, and I'll figure out what to do with this. So anyway, here we go. So we have our solvents, we have our lubricants, and the basic understanding of what it is how they're applied in different situations. And we'll go ahead and, you know, obviously, you like the video, thumbs up, subscribe, leave a comment, leave a question. You know, I definitely like to have questions, because it helps me to think about what it is. If you said, well, you know, what about, I've heard that this is pretty good. What do you think about that? And I can say, sounds like a good idea, or, well, maybe not. I'd have to test that out. So this is really where I'm going to, you know, guys, you see, I tried a lot of products trying to kind of see what it does. I'm not Project Farm. Now, I would recommend him. I like the guy a lot because he does a lot of actual tests. I mean, he'll take these to say, well, which is better, the DuPont Chain Saver or the PV Blaster wax-based thing? And he'll go through some tests and stuff like that. I really like the guy, and to me, again, I'm an engineer. I love the way he talks. I love the way he goes through these processes and describes. You know, he'll have these graphs and stuff like that. I mean, thrilling for an engineer, right? Very, very good. So stay tuned, and we'll see what else we have. Till the next one.